Megan Avery here, and I thought I might take a moment to make a quick little video about how I got started and became a sewing teacher. Life is funny, and I never in my wildest dreams thought I would make a career out of teaching people how to sew. And writing this post has been a nice little trip down memory lane. Thinking about my very first sewing workshop back in 2003 or 2004. But luckily things have changed a little bit around here, and I've learned a lot about having a successful sewing studio in the last 15 years that I've been in business, I guess. So to back up, if I'm completely honest, sewing actually wasn't even on my radar probably until about 6 months past working in the real world. That was after college. I had moved to New York City. Now I did learn how to sew when I was a kid. I was in a 4-H group where I lived in rural upstate New York. So that's what you did. You joined 4-H and you learned how to sew. And in fact, I even showed projects at the county fair, believe it or not. But I must have lost interest in it as a teenager because I didn't really do it in high school or in college. And I don't think I even really thought about it too much. I think I took home ec in 7th grade, but that was about it. Then after leaving college, I had gotten a job lined up at an advertising agency in New York, and I moved to New York City. And I started a job at Ogilvy and Mather, and that was June 1st. So it was like literally right after college. I was ready to be in the real world. I was ready to be in New York City. And I had all these crazy dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, which is kind of a joke because that's really, really far from, where I am right now and who I want to be. So it did not take long for me to see that the corporate life was not for me. So about 6 months into this new job, I was visiting my parents who still lived in rural upstate New York. And I think at the time I was lacking creativity in my life. So for whatever reason, I saw my mom's old Singer sewing machine sitting there in my childhood home. And I was craving that creativity so badly that I took it from the house and brought it back with me to my then apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey, right outside of New York City. And I honestly don't even think I told my mom I took it. I just took it with me. I knew that she never used it, but I guess I figured if I let her know I was gonna take it, she wouldn't let me. Anyway, I didn't have a whole lot of money to buy my own sewing machine, so her sewing machine came back with me, and I don't even think she missed it that much. And eventually I think I bought her a new one, so all is well. Anyway, after I confiscated my mom's sewing machine, I started making a lot of bags. I wasn't great at sewing, so bags were really fun because I didn't have to worry about size. So I ended up starting a bag business. I sold customized bags online, and this was back before the days of Etsy. So I would just sell them on a website. People could customize their order, and I'd send them out. And I loved having my little bag business. I decided that being an entrepreneur was definitely something that I could really get into. So I kept my bag business going. I ended up eventually getting laid off from a .com job that I'd worked at after I was at Ogilvy, sort of when all the .com bubble sort of burst around 2001. Anyway, had this bag business on the side, was like working my tail off doing that, and it was going pretty well, but I kind of got to the point where if I didn't, having them start being made over like in a factory, then it wasn't going to go anywhere. I was basically just sewing morning, noon, and night, and even though I loved sewing, it was just kind of a tedious thing to be making these bags all the time. So getting lots of questions from people about making bags and sewing bags, and I thought, well, why don't I teach a workshop on how to make a bag? And then I realized very quickly that a 2-hour workshop generated a lot more money than a bag that someone ordered. So I decided that sewing teaching, or teaching people to sew bags, I should say, was the way to go. And you know, making bags and sending them out, it's kind of lonely, tedious work. So I went with teaching and didn't, you know, just loved it from the minute it started. So yeah, I taught my first workshop. I think there was like 6 or 7 people there, charged them, you know, $50. This was after I did, you know, some free classes for friends, but ended up, you know, making what, $300 for a 2-hour workshop, and realized that this is definitely the direction I wanted to go. I didn't stop making bags for probably a couple years after that, because I still, you know, just had that going and couldn't let go of it like we do, but have loved every minute of teaching since then. So along the way, I've learned so much about teaching others how to sew. But I have to say, I probably was not that qualified to teach anybody how to sew at the point that I started teaching, because I hadn't really taken any lessons outside of 4-H and a little bit of home ec. I was pretty much self-taught, so I just spent tons and tons of time on the sewing machine, making things over and over again. And you know, I couldn't, when you think back on it, there wasn't even YouTube at the time, so it's kind of crazy how I learned to sew. But what I did have was the gift of ignorance and maybe a little bit of guts. Who knows? Anyway, like all good entrepreneurs, I faked it till I made it, and I'm so glad that I did. Because over the years, I think I've probably taught about 1,000 people how to sew, and now I am doing this Hip Stitch Academy thing and hopefully helping you grow your sewing business. So that's it in a nutshell. That's kind of how I got started as a sewing teacher.